All right, folks. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. So this is our final discussion session, although there still will be the exhibits next door for a little while longer. And at 4 o'clock, there will be cake. So lure people with food. But we are very fortunate this afternoon session to have folks here from the Human Fusions Institute. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and Linda, our ELSI advisor, will introduce herself as well, and then we'll have another conversation. And as before, for the other sessions, we will have your opportunity to ask questions as well. We have a mic and we can run them around to you as needed. So, but please try not to speak without the mic, because then it's not captured by the recording, and it gets very spooky on the recording because nobody hears the question and then they hear this answer and they wonder. So let's not do that. So with that, without further ado, let's start with you, Nick. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Nick Zingali. I'm with Cleveland State University. I've got kind of an interesting background. My undergrad work is in science, primarily a scientist by training. And then I began to do some work in business, primarily along the lines of like environmental policy work, and finally found myself in public administration in the governmental sector, which you wonder, how did he get from there to here in working in the space that I'm working in? So my work there really studied this concept of phenomenology, which is the way people kind of experience and make meaning out of their everyday events. Sometimes we call it everydayness. And so from a public policy perspective, I would study it on the basis of the way administrators primarily would administrate policies in a way that were meaningful to the public, and the way that they interpreted those policies and their meanings, and as they got implemented within the community. In that process, I got involved with an activity that was called the Internet of Things. And the Internet of Things was a pretty significant collaboration between Cleveland State University and Case Western. And it was funded by the Cleveland Foundation.
I remember the Internet of Things.
Yeah. And it got a bunch of us working together. And
Still a thing.
In that process, at that time, I didn't know anything of Dustin. And in that process, somebody said, hey, you need to meet with this, this character, Dustin Tyler. And he's doing these really interesting things, and I think you two would kind of hit it off. And so I met with him in the in your kind of basement office building, and that's right.
I'm not complaining.
So, anyways, we started talking, and within a few minutes of us having a conversation, he was talking about some of the work that he'd been doing with prosthetics and this idea of transferring touch and embodiment of prosthetic devices. And you had me at embodiment.
That's funny. I actually just learned a bunch of touch words and said them when I can. You sprinkle them around to get people engaged. I know what I'm talking about.
That's right. So one thing led to another, and that, I think now when we look at that, I think that was almost 7 years ago. Is that possible?
Yeah.
And so we started working together from that point on, and the rest is kind of history. I work now for Human Fusion. I'm still at Cleveland State University, but we've gotten some grants that help me to do the work with the Human Fusions Institute. And it's a really interdisciplinary place. I'll let Dustin say a little bit more about it. But my work primarily is to focus on the human and the human experience as they're kind of interacting with the technology. But it's not looked at in terms of siloed work. And you'll see as we start to talk about this a lot more, the mechanisms that have been put in place since inception on the interactivity and the interdisciplinary work is kind of now into our system. It's in our blood of how we do things. So I've been doing the work ever since then, and I'll leave the rest for when we get into more details of what I do.
Yeah, so I'm Dustin Tyler. I'm the Arthur Holden Professor in Biomedical Engineering here at Case Western Reserve University. I've had an appointment at the VA Medical Center for shoot, longer than I've been at Case, actually, so 20, well, some number of years that I guess I don't have to admit anymore. And then I've also recently had a startup company where we've been working on the stuff we're doing. The idea for this, I've spent my entire life on peripheral nerve interfaces. Actually, I grew up, I loved computer systems, I loved engineering. Way back in the day when I walked both ways uphill to school with no shoes on, computers were just getting started. And for me, I was fascinated by the fact of how computing can do anything effectively, right? So if you had the creativity to program this stupid little machine to do something, you could make it do it, and I love that. But I started to get really fascinated by the human brain as well, in that even now today, people are still trying to use the brain as the model for a computer, which is false in many ways, but that's another discussion. But this idea of the human technology balance and how we created technology based on human behavior, and then from what we could do with technology, learned about human behavior, really fascinated me. And so I ended up, I was a double undergrad, I ended up getting my PhD here at Case, but it's always been about connecting to the brain, connecting to the human nervous system in various ways. I've done that and then creating devices to restore movement for people who have spinal cord injury. And then most recently, and actually probably the biggest part for my career, has been restoring sensation for people with limb loss before this. And I'm also, by the way, a recovering engineer, just so you all know. I realize that engineering is secondary to humanity, and that's hard sometimes to realize. And what I mean by that is I spent a lot of time, especially when we started working with prosthetics, sitting in the lab with our subjects. And so we would give them this device. And of course, as an engineer, I'm like, well, what's it look like? How well does it work? All the technical mumbo jumbo about the thing, which I thought was cool. But you sit and talk to the people, and they just wanted to hold their wife's hand, right? They didn't really care about the mumbo jumbo. They cared about the impact it made on its life. And that was one of the things that really led me into, we got to think about technology differently. Technology is cool, and as engineers we build it because it's fun, and I want to do something unique, and then we release it in the world and see what happens with it. It's backwards, right? I mean, technology needs to be in the service of humanity. And at the end of the day, if you're not understanding humanity, how are you building technology that's in the service of that, right? And so technology for technology's sake doesn't make sense to me. And that's one of the core tenets in the beginnings of in the beginning of the Human Fusions Institute was this. The other thing that was very impactful to get this rolling was we would ask the subjects with the prosthetic, we'd say, what's it like using a prosthesis? And they would say, it's a tool into my arm, it helps me achieve things. But as soon as we connected to their nervous system, as soon as we gave them this sort of touch with the prosthesis, their language changed completely to like, I'm picking it up. Still the prosthesis, but their language changes to their hand because they felt it grabbing that. And the aha moment was like, well, that's just a robot. It's just a tool. What you've digitized is the experience on the hand, and I've sent it over wires, but I can send those wires across the world or anywhere, right? And so that prosthesis can be sitting in California, and they can still touch something with their hand. That's fundamentally mind-blowing because you no longer exist simply in Cleveland, right? We take our existence to be kind of where our skin is. That's my boundary because that's what I interact with the world. It's how I touch. I don't need the skin. I can give you touch from anywhere in the world, right? And so it starts to lead into this concept of what is that human technology future? How do we integrate these things? And so it led to this idea, and partially this was born out of the fact also, the other thing that drove me was prosthetics is not a high volume market, right? There's not a ton of interest. Funding comes during war, sadly. And so Middle East conflict is what was driving DARPA to fund this. And I knew we were lucky at the time to get a very substantial bolus, but it was going to disappear, and has disappeared. So if I'm going to make a difference for people with prosthetics, I needed to find another way, another way to figure out how this technology had value someplace I could actually continue to enhance it. And of course, most things that happen in medicine really happen in aerospace, they happen in microcomputers, et cetera. So I started to think about what is it that we're doing. And this idea of being the machine is a complete difference. And I think that we, as a fundamental, humanity and technology are forever intertwined. We don't live without technology, right? I mean, it's just the way life is. So we accept that part. We have to accept that part. But what's that future look like, right? As we begin to think about AI, robotics, and all these things, there's this dialogue of competition, which I'm not in favor of, right? So AI is going to replace you. That's hooey in my mind. Robots are going to replace you. That's hooey in my mind. But we have to think about what that future is, and Human Fusions is fundamentally looking at that. But the tenet for us is that we're going from using technology to being or embodying technology, right? If that doesn't freak you out or understand why I'm sitting on the stage, then I got to talk to you more. But ultimately, once you start to think about technology at that intimacy of a level, it means it's inherently a humanistic thing. Also, about that time, Black Mirror was around season 2. I watched a lot of that, and so I thought, well, I guess I need ethics in here to do this thing. But at the end of the day, it's ethics beginning. And so the last thing I'll say that's kind of baked into Human Fusions that really, to me, drives why this is so important, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that we tend to build technology and release it, and ethics and sociology describes what happened to society because of it, right? A lot of times we look retrospectively at what technology did. That doesn't make any sense. Technology is moving too fast, our legal systems are too slow, everything doesn't make sense, right? So we can't fix a problem afterwards anymore, and I could name several things that are kind of interesting in our society now. So how do you fix that? Well, you start with ethics and humanity in the beginning, right? As an engineer, it's one of the fundamental tenets is that if you give me input requirements and I'm the perfect engineer that builds the perfect thing for those input requirements, but they're the wrong input requirements, I still have a crap product. How do we not have ethics and humanities as the input requirements, the discussions on day one about what we're doing? And so that's the concept of multidisciplinarity, building this all in. There's some other stories about why phenomenology actually is important that I could talk about that I learned through our process, but I won't do those here. But this is the essence of HFI, right, is the human tech future. How do we use technology to amplify the human, right? So it's not a competition, it's amplification. These are tools that make us better. And what does that future look like? And how do we do it across the disciplines? And then the last thing this will be the last thing I say, is the other thing at the university is we've grown up into a siloed place where engineers take ethics because they have to, right? Or they go take a few classes. And I don't see ethicists ever in my class, right? And so that's wrong. And it comes the way we design. We got to go back to the original days of education where the philosophers were the scientists, where people were together. And we got to have them all sitting in the same room, so it's not a meeting once a month, but it's a water cooler that we're having the conversations that drive us forward. And so that's the building of the institute where we're at. It's this idea of multidisciplinarity. I'm done. That's the start.
Right. I feel like you don't need an ELSI advisor up here because you've already sort of incorporated ELSI. But
I've been hammered enough from a few of you around here. I'm just learning this pitch.
I have a few thoughts. So I'm Linda Bishai. I am not like these other two. One of these things is not like the others. That's me. I am Pooch's colleague from the Institute for Defense Analyses, that cute little DoD think tank tucked away in Alexandria. We hope nobody notices because we like what we do and we do it quietly. But basically, I am, unlike many of my colleagues at IDA, I am a social scientist. Pooch is another one of the sort of the rare birds. We tend to be former military or retired DoD officials or government somehow, military backgrounds, etc. My background is unashamedly, unabashedly civilian. I have a law and international relations background, so law and social science, and I actually tend to see law as a social science. That's how I look at it, and I teach international law to international affairs students at the George Washington University in my spare time. So I come at the problems of IDA from a partially legal and academic perspective, international relations perspective, but also from a field professional perspective, because I spent 12 years working for the U.S. Institute of Peace. Call me later if you would like to collectively mourn. It is an ongoing trauma at the moment for what happened to USIP, but I am eternally grateful for the 12 years I worked there because it allowed me to field test and experience and actually see the value of my academic training. I actually got to see what I had studied in grad school as, international relations and political identity, how it works in practice. And I spent many years in Africa, in North Africa, in the Middle East, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, seeing war zones and understanding how civil societies react in conflict and how political power operates, how social power operates. And yes, I'm also interested in brains and how they work and what humans do under certain conditions and how they act, and what power means and how it acts on social systems. very circuitous background to come at an ELSI project for DARPA and thinking about AI and ELSI analyses of military uses of AI in particular. But all that to say, why not? I'm just as, I think, offer that diverse perspective and interesting angle on it just as much as anyone else could. And I think that's the lesson that Shannon has been emphasizing throughout the day, and I value it, and I'm happy to be here. I love that you love that the user of the prosthetic wanted to feel his wife's hand. I love that. I think that's exactly right. I think that is what we should be tracking to. I get a little worried when I hear terms like amplification.
Good.
And the reason I get worried is because when we start to see, and it's one thing to have, I have night vision goggles. I can wear them when I need to. And it's quite another to have something attached, built in, become part of you, become fused with you. And I do understand in cases of injury and impaired function, that sometimes that actual bodily fusion could be the best outcome. But when you talk about amplification, making the human machine team better than the human in a physical sense, as in strength, as in a different kind of human, I start to get worried that we are losing what it means to be human, and that we will create perverse incentives for some people to want to be empowered and stronger and faster. And I don't know, did anybody else watch The Bionic Man in the 80s? Okay, so we have some.
Was wrong, by the way.
Yeah, of course it was $6 million. Yeah, not even. Right, but at the time, maybe in 1980s dollars or 70s, I can't remember when it was, but childhood fantasies, whatever. But I think at the time it was cool. In retrospect, it was horrifying. Surely Steve Majors would have jumped off a cliff after a week. What an insane thing to wake up from a horrific crash and find yourself attached to these stronger than humanly possible limbs, and then to be made to do all the stuff that, okay, go fix it. Go fix that big problem that normal humans can't fix, right? And so those are the kinds of things that come into my mind and get me worried. Now, I think it's really important to think about incentives when you're considering what we could do. And I also think it's important to think about why to do things and not just, can we? I think can we do it is not the right question. And I don't think these gentlemen are like this. I love that they're coming at it from this angle. I think far too many people say, can we? Yes, let's. Not should we? Because I think the should is a really important component of the question. Over to you.
I love it. That's a great introduction to where my thought is. And so I was on a Huffington Post interview live at one point after we were doing this, and the question asked to me was, when am I going to cut off my arm so I can get what you have? And I said, that would be the stupidest thing. Well, I didn't say it this way because it was a live interview, but in my head that would be the stupidest thing you could do because it makes no sense. Also, there's a lot of this biological engineering, genetic engineering, all this kind of stuff, which are, I think of those questions, those are permanent changes, right? And so that's one sort of decision. I'm not talking about a permanent decision, right? This is things that we do now. You turn it on and you're engaged, you turn it off, you're not. So replacing, these are the interesting questions, and I think that is a great way to be approaching it. Augmenting, amplifying, these are terms that people get anxious about. However, I would pose to you, you're already amplified and augmented, and we all are, right? I can hop in a crane and go lift tons. That's how we build this world around us. I wear glasses. I listen to the radio. The radio is inherently an augmentation, right? It's transmitting waves that I don't have the sensors to pick up. So I built a device, picks it up, and transfers it into what I currently have. So I think that we get scared about augmentation because we think of the far end of it, the Black Mirror version thereof. So I'm not scared of the term augmentation or getting there. I am, however, inherently scared about where's the boundaries. And this is where I think the quote from Kennedy I think guides me. In technology itself is not inherent, doesn't have any conscience. It inherently is not bad. It's how we use it. And so I've heard on NPR a while ago a very good piece that it's not the technology, It's not that it's going to be good or bad, it's going to be both. It's that if we don't have the dialogue, you have the problem. So I actually like the fact that people are anxious about augmentation. I am unhappy about people who say don't do it, because then you're not really looking at the problem, right? So I think if you say do it because we can, wrong. Don't do it because it could be bad, wrong. I think the question, and why, again, I believe very much in the ELSI and this HFI, is that the dialogue is the critical element, right? And so augmentation is a word that has different meanings, but everything you use augments you. It's not a question of whether technology is going to augment. That's going to continue what's going to happen. The question is, how do we get there, and how do we achieve the best human nature of that? And that's the interesting question, right? And then we get into the sociological aspects of what is it when we connect, our computers make. That becomes a very complex question. It's more than me just to ramble on here. But I think the idea of don't augment is problematic. The question of not discussing it is the problem. So I think that's where we have to really sit and say and have this dialogue about what is the right way to do this.
Yeah, I just want to push back quickly on equivocating a radio and a stronger than normal human strength limb. Those are not both the same kind of augmentation. A radio is a tool. A limb attached to a body, or a replacement part of a human body that's built in and attached to it and makes it bigger and stronger and better, and doing things completely different than a human can even do. That's just a whole different category. I just reject it as all the same kind of augmentation.
Well, so I'll push back a little bit on that too, is like replacing my body part maybe, but I would posit that I can already have a technology to do that, right? I mean, look just down the street, we have something way stronger than I am, and it's people operating it. The way they operate it's different. Now, cutting off my arm is silly for various reasons. One, this is still more functional than a piece that I put on. So I think there's the question of replacement. That's maybe a different thing versus adding. And then we already add all the time. How we add it, what do we lose by adding that? Those are the questions I think that are important, not inherently doesn't work. Now, again, I come at it from more of a medical position where this is more life and death type of questions, and then it's not a question. But I think this is the really interesting dialogue, is where is that boundary that is correct? So I can go use a crane, way stronger. I can get in a car and go way faster. I can wield a hammer, and it's, so.
Why aren't those just tools?
They are.
Yeah.
But why is it not? I mean, it's not so much that it's not a tool, it's how I connect to that tool and I use it. So can I make the tool more valuable if I connect in a more inherent way? Or, and not to go too far off direction here, but let's say you have something that you're worried about using in a very dangerous way, right? If that sensation, if I can add sensation now where I'm going to feel pain from that. Right now I can go use the crane, drop something on somebody, have no experience with that. But if I can connect to that individual, if I could feel the pain that's involved with that, it's going to affect me directly. It connects me to that thing. So I can use technology in a much more integrated and effective way where it actually ties into the humanness. I mean, right now we'd actually argue technology is less human. If it's connected as part of me, it becomes more human potentially as well. And I'm not a fan of cutting off your arm, changing your biology. We're trying to create technology you can put on, take off. It's your choice. I think that's an important thing versus a Steve Majors approach of things. So I think you can make technology actually more human, which is the interesting part to me to answer this in that way.
So I guess I have maybe a slightly different take on this. Maybe it's a broader take. So I think of the 20th century as technology that was used in medicine to kind of bring us or help us make us feel better, right? If somebody loses an arm, we can put a prosthetic device on there, and we're bringing them up to a certain kind of physical status. I think the 21st century is going to be about these questions of technology augmenting not just the human, but the human experience. And so I don't know if the right question is, should we, right? I think the question is, it's going to happen. How do we need to be thinking about it, right? Those are the tougher things that I think are in place right now. I think about this when Destin talked about this like mind-blowing experience that occurred when we were talking about the prosthetic hand being anywhere in the world, right? And that's the mind-blowing portion of this, right? the idea that we can give somebody touchback or the sensation of touchback in their prosthetic hand, that seems to be a beautiful thing, right? I can hold my wife's hand again, and some of the subjects talk about these emotional experiences that they have. And that's certainly a special thing. But the fact that I can take that same hand and put it anywhere in the world, and therefore have this sensation of multisensory transfer, sight, sound, and tactile sensation anywhere in the world, that raises a lot of other questions that we need to be wrestling with and begin to think about. I guess I'm in the point where it's already happening. So what are the frameworks that we need to start using to thinking about this? I don't know that there's any mechanisms that we have socially that could stop it. If we think that, I'm not quite sure. It'd be a hard argument to convince me otherwise. It's kind of like trying to stop artificial intelligence right now. I think the conversations need to be more about it's here, what we do with it at that point. And so what are the human dimensions? What are the human meanings that we have? And how do we then begin to sustain those as these technologies kind of improve us and move us along? The last thing I'll say on this topic, and this kind of relates back to kind of the way Dustin talks about tools or different technologies and how they changed us. You know, folks around hear me talk all the time about something called Society 5.0, right? If you think about where we've been, Society 1, you know, hunters and gatherers, some people will call it like the cognitive revolution that kind of took place. And then we've got Society 2, which was agronomy, and it you know, there was a lot of changes that took place scientifically with the way we were doing things, but it also brought about a ton of social structures that we didn't have before. Hunter-gatherers didn't necessarily have to worry about property rights as much and exchange systems as much. They you know, currency and writing that happened during that time kind of brought in additional conditions. The Industrial Revolution, that and the technologies and the energy trajectories that happened at that time brought additional social types of activities. I'm willing to bet at every one of those stages there was somebody saying, don't do it, right? We're going into this direction, like, stop. We don't know what it's gonna mean, right? I think we are moving through now the information, and to me, the next phase that I think we're gonna get into is Society 5.0 is what I'm calling the existential phase. And the existential phase is going to call into question all of human experience, the way we interact with one another, the way we exist in space and in time, how we exist, what we can exist as. If I can transfer my multi-sensory experiences into a prosthetic hand, what's to say that I can now put that prosthetic hand into a virtual environment or in my entire body into a virtual environment and exist as a whale or exist, and these things, the literature on this is really clear. You know, the literature on presence, you know, when somebody's been in virtual reality, it takes about 15 seconds for them to kind of flip over and begin to experience that as a real condition, where they're beginning to not just experience in a sense of a sensation, but assign meaning to what it is that's going on. And that assignment of meaning and purpose takes that to another level because it actually enhances the interpretation that's taking place that becomes very intimate to the individual at that point. So I'll leave it here.
All right, I have many thoughts, but I'm actually betting that most of you have thoughts too. So I'm expecting that. I see a hand in the back, Jesse. Could we get a mic?
Use that one. Cool.
Okay, great. Yeah, I had a question about the term fusion, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not just terminological. I think it's actually conceptual. So I think fusion. All right, so I was thinking, what's the difference between human-computer interaction, human-machine interaction, human-robot interaction? I think it's the degree of integration. So I think that there's like a little bit of an unsatisfying lack of specificity in the term fusion here, and the way I see it is something like a full integration, and I think that's different than say using a car or operating a crane, right? Or interacting with an iPhone. That's something that I pick down and I put up, or I use the hammer, or I use the tool, as Linda was saying. So I guess I'm wondering, and there are degrees of integration, of course, and we could quibble about what counts as fused and what doesn't, and what's merely an interaction. So let me ask you this. 2 questions. One is that, do you see a meaningful distinction, and is that important to get that clarity? And then 2, if not, is it just branding?
Honest truth?
Yeah.
Obviously. It's
Please.
an acronym at one point. Yeah.
All right.
I've been doing that my whole life. The kids. So the origin of it was the functional symbiotic integration over neural systems was where fusions came from. But the reason for
Gotcha.
choosing that,
Right.
but your point is exactly why we went with that as the sort of the piece, is because that is the question, is like, we use technology now. It's an interface. It's a connection.
Yeah.
If that hand is me, right, now there's a embodiment. The term embodiment has a lot of different meanings.
Sure.
It's also confused. It's a fusing, and it has a bit of angst to it. I'm totally aware of it, right? But actually the dialogue is nice because we have that. So what does fusion mean? In my mind, what I started with, and I think the opportunity is, the hand is my hand. So where I think of, like, if a medical technology, for example, doing surgery is one thing. I'm using the tool. Being there, operating on somebody, even if it's across the country, is very different. So the question we try to ask, and we're starting to look at, is, do I embody a remote machine? Do I have the presence there, the fused experience? And not because I can do it. The purpose is, what's the functional benefit? So thinking of remote healthcare, Zoom ain't it, right? I mean, that's what remote healthcare is you get on and you see a doctor and you have a conversation. Picture their face and a call. I think, and I don't want to overstep my bounds here because I have the PH useless version of a D, not the MD.
Likewise.
Yeah. But everybody I talk to, it's about the experience of touch. It's the interaction that actually makes medicine different, right? And so the idea of fusing with technology in the sense that I embody that foreign location, that I can actually behave there, takes us away from remote control robotics to fusing in the sense that I now am there. So that's the way I use the word, and we're thinking. I also will tell you that the human fusions is an incredibly intelligent, right? Not intelligent. I didn't mean to compliment. It's intentional, not intelligent, intentional. Human is always first. So whenever we talk about this stuff, it's not the machine. It's not what the machine can do. It's the human fusing. And so the other way I look at that is the human's embodying or imbuing itself in the machine, not the machine taking over the human, which is part of the dialogue there. And so those are kind of, I mean, fusion was intentional. It started as an acronym, but we chose that for this reason. And it is open, and we're still trying to figure out what that means.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
I need to walk. So I'm a neurologist. I've been involved in cognitive enhancement for a while. And here's my question. We're living in the 6th extinction of multiple species, including potentially ours. This is a time where we really need new concepts, symbiotic wisdom, not just artificial and natural intelligence, something that is greater than what we have now, I believe. And that's probably going to emerge in organizational life, and perhaps, if we're lucky, universities. So my question to you is, how have you structured the Human Fusion Institute, which is already interesting given that you have people from 3 different institutions on the podium, to have something emerge that's transdisciplinary, and I'm using that word, not cross and inter, which you've used, something that's transcendent, something that's more than intelligence and actually reflects wisdom, which communicates not just cognition, but also values and emotions. So to make the question simple, how has the Human Fusion Institute contributed to that conversation about organizational creativity in these hugely challenging times for us? Thank you.
I'll give a shortish answer and then turn it over, because this was day 1 question 7 years ago from a colleague on my left. You're right. I was informed of cross, trans, and inter being very different terms, and we've spent a lot of time thinking about that. What I've learned from others, and what we're trying to do in HFI, is it's not working together, right? It's not knowing each other and having meetings. It's actually learning each other's language. In fact, our language together changing, right? So in some ways, my short answer to this is I'd like to have engineers speak Kant and philosophers speak calculus, right, type of thing. So I can't, like, I'm still going to say I don't know what the term hermeneutics means. I just pick on Nick all the time for this. But at the end of the day, what does it mean to experience the machine is very different in Nick's language than it is in my language originally. When those become sort of the same, when my concepts he starts to understand and his become what I understand, they're no longer one of those disciplines or two of them together, but they become something unique. That to me is the transdisciplinary component that we're trying to get. It's something new, not emerging or setting next to each other, but something new. And then I'll let Nick answer this, but how we're trying to achieve that is one of the important things of trying to change the structure of the university a little bit, right? And this is hard, very hard. Because what's happened is we create a school of arts and sciences, and you create offices across the campus. And we have a meeting every now and again where I see Shannon, but she's busy doing all of her other stuff, and we're all busy doing our things. One meeting talking to Shannon or my colleagues here is not going to make a change. Right, so why is it that we have our disciplinary home with all of our colleagues and we sort of keep ourselves focused on what we already know and what we do, as opposed to set it where every day I get to talk to other people to learn these other languages. So the idea is that Human Fusions is the people in it, the faculty are across the schools, sit there, that's your home. You still have your academic and your tenure home sits in you do the teaching in your expertise area, but your day life is across these disciplines, right? And then Tim Beals leading, of course, the HAT, the Human and Technology major. Mm-hmm. It's looking at new curriculum where how do you fit these two together so it's not I go take a few courses, you take a few courses, but it becomes something different. So transdisciplinary is not cross or it's trans. It becomes something new. So I'll yield at that point.
Yeah, don't worry. I'm not cutting you off.
I was going to say, I spoke too long. I really apologize.
No.
Sorry,
I definitely want Nick. I just wanted to add because something that you may not be aware of with the Human Fusions is that we do have integrated not only some bioethicists and other folks, but straight down the line philosopher. I wasn't trained as even a bioethicist, just philosopher, and I'm involved. And then my colleague here, Dr. Torres, is also a philosopher, and it works. And we have meetings like once a week. It's a real difference because Dustin's right. Otherwise, these things don't happen if you only can bump into people, once a month. It just, or at best, it just doesn't. Go ahead, Nick.
Thanks for that question. I mean, there was a bunch in there. Where you started is not where I thought you were going to end up with the question. So I really, yeah. But what I loved about the beauty of that question is it kind of captured the types of things that we talk about. So we have this group. It's filtered throughout HFI, but the group that I'm mostly involved with is called the Human Factors Group, and that group at one point in time it was thought of as how do we kind of capture the human experience in with this technology, and it had kind of a narrow lens to it, but since over the past 2 years it's totally exploded. And we now have people representing multiple engineering disciplines that meet with us. Shannon mentioned the different philosophers, ethicists. Michael's in there as one of the HAT group folks with Tim's group, and he's working out. Now the thing is, we don't just meet and just chat. The beauty of what's happening is that out of that group, we've spun out interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary projects. And I use those terms specifically there, because to me, transdisciplinarity feels more like a moment in time. It feels like a specialty. And it's the way I think about transdisciplinarity. So without getting into it, I'll just give you the brief analogy that I always run through my mind on this. So I think about multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary efforts, kind of like this idea of like blending a salad, right? I can put things together in a salad. Multidisciplinary, if I want the tomato, I can just kind of grab the tomato out of it. Interdisciplinary, I'm mixing in some dressing. It has a different flavor to it and everything like that. Transdisciplinary work is more like baking a cake. right? I'm taking the ingredients, I'm putting them in, I'm mixing them together. And as I mix them together, they're blending in such a way that the ingredients no longer look like themselves to begin with. And I wouldn't even say that that's transdisciplinary at that point. What makes it transdisciplinary is that heat, something special, some kind of energy is introduced. And it totally converts from a liquid form into like this cake form, and you no longer even have a chance to pull it. I would venture to guess that the human factors group, you can ask the group, and I don't want to speak for them, but we're not the same anymore. After being in that group for multiple years and meeting with one another, we are not the same people we were when we'd entered into that environment. And I'll just close with this. I told you I started off life as a scientist, and I loved science. But I also, at a point in time in my life, I lost hope in science. I lost hope in science because I saw it as insulary, I saw it as arrogant, and I saw it as leading us down the wrong paths. Human fusions has brought back my faith in science again. I'm now become interested in science again when I wasn't interested in it before. I lost hope in it, and it's because of the way that we do the work. And so that's been a transdisciplinary moment for me, a meaningful moment for me.
I know that there are more questions and so forth. We are technically out of time. It went so quickly. But you look like you were about to say something, Dustin.
I was just going to add a few things.
Yeah.
And one, I'm glad I didn't go the pureeing the salad. That would have been disappointing. But I like the cake side. But the other side that you mentioned briefly, but I want to emphasize because it's really hard mentioning how we get here with ELSI and HFI and everything. Time. He said years. You don't get transdisciplinary by a project, by a day, by a few meetings. You have to commit. And that's the really hard part here. And getting HFI running is a commitment. The university, I have to give them credit, committed to a space, committed to time, committed to give us the run. And it doesn't happen overnight. If you're looking for tomorrow's success, it's the wrong idea. You have to build the programs, build the thing, buy in, get the buy-in. So I just wanted to emphasize that you can't just do it tomorrow. It's a commitment.
Absolutely. Now, we're not taking them away. You can still ask them questions, but I'm supposed to stop folks in here so that we can convene out in the lobby there, and there will be cake. But you can also still talk to our wonderful experts. But if you would help me, please, giving them a round of applause.